contract. First thing I want to say, if you are going to write a purchase contract, number one, when you have met with your buyers, please have them to sign the consumer guide to agency. And that just explains how you represent them. It's good you can't see my hands. How you represent them. And then by the time I sit down to write a purchase offer, I prefer for them to have already read through the residential property disclosure and have a few facts. But anyway, so I wanted to say this also. Right now, oh, okay. I think there's somebody waiting to get in. Let me see here. Admit all. Let's get them in here. Oh, shoot. Angela was going to keep track of them from her office. No, I don't know how to do it. Oh, there they are. Good. Hi. Hi. Kathy, hi. So anyway, yeah, so kind of have your information together before you write the contract. And being as we're in the market right now where everything is like hurry, hurry, go, 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 your competitive offers, etc. And nevertheless, please, please take the time to, even though you're, on your computer, but take the time to go through this contract with your buyer, or if you represent the seller when you're, going over it with them, but take the time to really go through it because there's so much stuff in here. So anyway, if we're just writing the contract, so I made up a date, never heard of Magnolia Avenue, but fill in, that's the property they're buying at the very top line. And then when you fill this in, just put in the date, parcel number, your purchase price, and then in any additional terms and conditions you might have. It could be a contingency or could be the appraisal clause or whatever, but any additional terms and conditions, you put those there. Attorney approval clause. We always say to the buyers and to the sellers, you should be represented by an attorney, and they make that choice. So if your buyer, let's just say we're just writing this for the buyer. If the buyer is going to want an attorney, be sure you put in 3 days, 5 days, whatever. And it is calendar days. Try to stay away from business days on anything because who knows what business days are. Under financing, so section 3.1, that is just if your purchaser is going to pay cash. And so you would have them both initial there, and then buyer shall deliver to the seller or seller's broker within 3 calendar days too. Just to show where their money's coming from. Don't ever accept that they have cash if you don't have evidence of it. I mean, they could have it in savings, they could have it in investments. If they say they think you're going to win the lottery, then don't accept that. Okay, go to page 2. And before you start the contract, if you auto-populate everything, the address would just show up there at the top, and you do want it on every page. If they're going to get financing, so for the lender pre-qualification, hopefully, excuse me, hopefully they've already been pre-qualified, and so you would just put, 0 days there because you're going to send it with the purchase contract. And again, if you're in a bidding war, please have your pre-qualification done. The loan application, I would probably put in there 3 days. If you don't put anything, it says 7. I honestly think if I were the seller, I would like to see 2 or 3 days because I want to know right away, are they going to do it or not? And put in what type of financing they are. And then it just says the buyer will provide all of the information and documentation to the lender, the insurance agent. And then if you go down there in the dark print, it says, failure of the buyer to deliver the lender's written notification within 3 calendar days following buyer's receipt, therefore constitutes a waiver of buyer's right to terminate. Now, again, in today's market, because there's quite often like backup offers. So if your buyer doesn't do everything like on schedule, I mean, they can be kicked out of the contract and go on to the next one. So 3.2 on loan commitment. On that, depends on if you're going, if I were to contract today, October 26th, and I'm going to close November 30th, I would probably want to put 20 days in there, maybe 25. But whatever it is, make sure your lender knows that because you have to keep him accountable to get things done on time. They read the contract. Do they always do it? No. So you just got to talk to the lender and make sure they get that done on time. So it says that last sentence, if at the expiration of the loan commitment period, the buyer has not delivered a loan commitment to the seller or seller's broker, the seller may terminate this contract pursuant to paragraph 3.3. So just make sure that your buyer that you're working with, that they know that. I mean, this is like, they have to be a little bit accountable too. And also you can do, when you do your contract, is do the timeline. I always give a copy to my seller, to my buyer, so they know what's going on. Hi, Don.
Hello, Joan.
How are you?
Good, thanks.
You could probably be up here teaching this.
Oh, I just like to jump in to see if there's something I've missed.
You know what? It's always good. Anything I tune into, I always learn something. So.
Yep. Thank you.
On the appraisal contingency, and this is the one where it says, if it doesn't appraise for the purchase price, then the buyer can terminate it. Now, right now, in some price ranges, we're putting in the appraisal clause, and that clause is in our clauses. And again, it says 12. It says failure of the buyer to deliver the written notice of termination within 5 calendar days following the buyer's receipt of the appraisal constitutes a waiver of buyer's right to terminate. So just, again, make sure your buyer knows that. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I wish you could all be here. 3.3, demand for financing. So if the seller doesn't receive all of the proper documents from the buyer within 7 calendar days before the closing date, the seller can do a demand for financing evidence, and we actually have a clause for that in templates, and you can do that. And anyway, failure of the seller to timely deliver the written demand for financing evidence constitutes a waiver of seller's right to terminate pursuant to this provision. So it says, if your buyer does not have his financing in place within 7 days prior to the closing, you can just go on and ignore it and hopefully go ahead and close. If the seller understands this 3.3, he might want you to do the demand for financing. And again, so many of these houses do have other people wanting to buy them. Does that make sense? Okay. under taxes and assessments, it just says again that, taxes, any assessments, agricultural use tax recoupments, any other unpaid real estate taxes, those would all be, brought to what they owe at the time and date of the closing. And of course, on taxes, normally the seller gives the buyer credit at the time of the closing because the taxes, like right now, if you close today on October 26th, taxes would be paid in all of 2019. So if we close today, the seller would owe from January 1 through October 26th today. And sometimes the sellers don't quite understand that because they paid their last tax bill. They think their taxes are paid up to date. So you just have to remind them how they're always paid in arrears. And that brings up another thing. In our clauses, and I don't have that right here, but if you're selling a house, maybe it's just a year old, it was a brand new build a year ago, I mean, their taxes might not even be assessed to that lot with their taxes with the house on it. So you want to make sure in that, if you look at a house and it's $350,000 and you look at their taxes and they're $2,000, you go, whoa, something's wrong. So anyway, if that's the case, you want to put in a clause that these taxes would be brought up to date according to today's proration. Community development charge, that some communities have that, like Gulf Village, I think Scioto Reserve, New Albany, there's a lot out there. But a lot of those areas, when they were developed, the developer created this community development charge, which adds more money to their taxes. So if you're selling in that area, or if you're listing in that area, you want to make sure that you know if there is a community development charge in that area. Okay. Fixtures and equipment. One thing they added that's new to the 2020 contract, they added water heater. Water heater was never in there until this year. So kind of go through that and make sure that everything that your buyer wants is in there. And anything that you add, you can include the following. And if you put in like Samsung dishwasher, Samsung refrigerator, GE oven, whatever the appliances are, put them in there, name the brand name. I like to do that. And then say, as seen in house when viewed on October 26th. The following shall be excluded. If you want the swing set taken out of the yard, put it in there. I can't think what else, but sometimes there's things in the house that people don't want. You don't want to put it in there. And then following leased items shall be excluded, and put none if there's nothing in there. So inspections and tests, this is like really big. So please make sure you understand all of this. So I'm going to go on down. Okay, 6.3, specified inspection period. So if I'm writing the contract today, I would say buyer shall have 10 days to get it done. And let me say this, if you want to recommend a home inspector, it's really good to give them 3 names. And, they always, how many buyers know a home inspector? So they usually ask us. And if you're going to give one name, give them 3 names, tell them they can talk to those people, or you know what, they can find one on their own. but we do want them to be a licensed home inspection. So if they have 10 days to get it done, it says calendar days after the date of acceptance of the contract. So if we had the contract accepted today, October 26th, and you have 10 days, so I usually do it on my hand, it's easier, but I go 27th, 28th, 29th, count your days off. Make sure you count those days correctly. I just had an agent in here, I think maybe a month ago. She put in 10 days. Her contract date was like September 15th. And she added 10 to that and came out with the wrong number. And it did cause an issue. So, because she was a day late in going in with her request to remedy period. So you have 10 days. And make sure you get everything in there. If they want radon, if they have a swimming pool and you want to put that in, if it's a really old house, you want lead-based paint, whatever you want is pretty well covered there. Well, I don't think pool, if you had a swimming pool to be, you want it tested too, I would add that in. And then, when it talks like where they have lead poisoning in young children, it's kind of interesting. One time I watched the forensic files and this little 2-year-old died and they didn't know what it was. And anyway, she was out on the porch and ate paint every day. So there you go. Now, 6.4, if the buyer's not in good faith, satisfied with the property, you can elect to go ahead and ask for the seller to do things. Or you can say, nope, don't want that house, walking away, just do a mutual release and get out of the contract. Now, the buyer and seller shall have, the seller has, maybe you'd put in 5 days for the seller to come back with an agreement as to what they're going to do. They may come back with nothing. So, and prepare your buyer for that. Again, in this market, the sellers aren't doing very much. And that 5 days, actually starts on the 10th day of the inspection. If the inspection's done in 5 days, it doesn't start that. It still starts the last day of at the end of the inspection period. So make sure buyer understands that. Make sure the seller understands that. So when you actually, if you have the buyer and you want to do a request to remedy, we have a form for that, buyer's request to remedy. So put in there whatever you want them to do. And sometimes people say by professional, whatever. You know what? If it's something simple like a piece of wood being nailed onto the deck, you don't need a professional person. If it's plumbing, if it's electrical, I would put in my request that it to be a professional, or you could just put a licensed plumber, a licensed electrician. And when I send that in, I always send in, sometimes I just send in the parts of the inspection that are applicable to what I'm asking for. Sometimes I send them the whole request. So just to let them know, hey, we only asked for these 4 things and there was a lot more wrong with it than we were asking for. So I kind of like sending them the whole thing. And plus, once they get that, if this contract doesn't work out, they have to change their residential property disclosure and add those things. So kind of explain that to your seller. So anyway, if they're just going to terminate it, you send in the termination. And I want to get into the, let me go on here. I want to get into the earnest money. Because, okay, it says, so notice in termination, the last sentence says, upon termination, the earnest money deposit shall be returned to the buyer pursuant to paragraph 12. Well, it doesn't really mean it's returned to him because it is pursuant to paragraph 12, and we will get into that. Condominium or homeowners association document provision. This is all new in this 2020 purchase contract. So make sure you go through that and explain it to the buyer. And let me just go over to the listing for a minute. If you're the listing agent of this home and it is a condominium, be sure that your seller understands everything that he will have to provide to the buyer when he gets a contract on that listing. Okay, let's go back to just being the buyer. I'm sorry, I'm drinking a lot. I have some allergies to something out there. Okay, and
So Joan,
uh-huh.
sorry, guys.
Okay, what?
So if we can't get the information from the condominium association, so we only have 5 days to get that from them. Are you getting at the beginning when you get the listing?
You know what? I say get it when you get the listing. I mean, we're just doing the contract, but yes, when you get the listing, and actually I put that information in documents, what all you need. I just took it from there. But if I'm going to list a condominium, I am going to take that with me and tell my seller that this is what they need to do. And by law, the condominium association does have to give that to the seller. And we know these condo associations sometimes can be a pain in the neck to get anything from them. Shouldn't have to cost them anything. They should just give it to the seller.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So the review period, this is like if they're buying a condominium, how much time they have to review that once they receive it. Now, warranties, kind of get, if you're working with buyers or sellers, kind of get to know which warranty companies you like to use. And I usually recommend a couple. Some of them have the buyers, if they have a problem, to go ahead and call the company and get their own person to come in and fix it. Some warranties, you just call them and they send somebody in to fix it. So just kind of figure out, what you like better. Title insurance, and this, and again, you just want to explain to the buyer, number one, what title insurance is and who pays for it. Somebody always wants to know who pays for everything. And I usually I don't read through all of that. I just say title insurance is paid for by the seller, and it is assurance that you're getting a good and clear title to the property that you're buying. And you can go into more detail if you want, but. And anybody, if you have questions, just unmute and ask me. Now, 9.2 says the seller shall deliver or cause to be delivered to the buyer or buyer's broker a copy of the commitment, that's the title commitment, no later than 15 days prior to the date of the closing. And again, although it's in the contract, make sure that your title company knows that and they have it on their timeline. Because these contracts can just be terminated by anybody because something wasn't done. So if it's 15 days, you have to have it. And that's just the commitment. I don't know where that noise is coming from. It's just a commitment to title company say, yep, based on our search, everything's looking good as far as the title. Now, 9.3 is the buyer may object if the commitment indicates something that they don't write. I mean, you know, the neighbor's fence could be on that property or whatever, so. And again, I guess I don't spend a whole lot of time on 9.3. You might want to or you might not, and I think it depends on the property. So to make a long story short, if there is something wrong, the buyer doesn't object, then it constitutes a waiver of their right to object, and you just go on. And then 9.5, at the closing, the seller shall sign and deliver to the buyer a title insurer an affidavit with respect to off-record title matters in accordance with the community custom. And oh, that's I want to go back up to 9.4. On the current survey, when they get a survey, you know, at the closing, and I know a lot of you have been to many closings, but anyway, the closing agent will ask them to sign off on that. Right, Stacy?
Yes, that's correct. In most cases, the lender's requiring us to do a survey because they want a survey endorsement on the property.
And that's good, I think.
Yeah, that's 99% of them require it.
Yeah, and you know what? When you get into like Upper Arlington, dear Lord, those houses have been added on to up second floor. I mean, you know, particularly when I do something in Upper Arlington, I want to make sure, you know, that we see that current survey, and I like to see the permits for what they've done. So anyway, that's a whole, I'm getting off subject, I'm sorry. And I'll go back there a minute. Damage or destruction of premises, and these things happen. I mean, you can put a house into contract and they can have a fire in the kitchen, they get flood in the basement, or, you know, things happen in that 45, 60-day period. And so if there is anything that, we just had one this year where there was a condominium out on the east side, and they had a really bad fire in the kitchen. And so they did eventually fix it up, and then the buyer just backed out anyway. So, and the buyer, if something like that happens, you do give written notice to the buyer within 2 calendar days to let them decide if they want to go ahead and buy the house or if they want to not buy it and take their money back. And if they don't respond to it, then that just says, hey, the buyer's okay with it. But he has every right to terminate the contract. Earnest money deposit. To me, this is always big. Sometimes people write contracts without any earnest money, which is fine. And but anyway, just say, you know, how much and when it's going to be deposited. And a lot of people are collecting the earnest money after the 3 calendar days after the expiration of the agreement to remedy period. And that way, the buyers can have their home inspection done. And if they go, no, you know what? I'm not proceeding. I'm not giving my money, and it's over. So, and we still do a mutual release on that because we want to release everybody from everything. And sometimes seller will say, well, you know, we were supposed to get it. No, not until 3 days after the expiration of the agreement to remedy period. And I will tell you, this is not a part of this contract, but a couple of years ago, we had a seller and the buyer contract, you know, was with $5,000 earnest money. Well, the check bounced. So And the sellers learned that we couldn't give it to them because we didn't have the money. And the purchase contract does say that that earnest money is subject to it being in our account. So if they don't give it to us, we can't give it back. Okay. Upon receipt of the earnest money by the broker, the earnest money shall be deposited in the broker's trust account. And also, you need to send evidence of that to the other agents so that they know that we have it. So 12.3 is really important. So it says a couple places in the purchase contract that if something doesn't happen, some contingency isn't met, that the earnest money goes back to the buyer. And it's just not true. So anyway, if it's going to be returned to the buyer, now let's say the buyer just backs out. He goes, no, decide I don't want it. Well, you know what? You do a mutual release and hopefully the seller would get that earnest money. But sometimes the buyer won't sign it. If that money just stays in our trust account, if it stays there for up to 2 years and we do not have a court order or something from the seller that they still want that money, if it's in there for 2 years, then the very last sentence, if within 2 years from the date the earnest money was deposited in the broker's trust account, the parties have not provided the broker with such signed instructions or notice that such legal action to resolve the dispute has been filed, the broker shall return the earnest money to the buyer with no further notice to the seller. And I always like to make sure, number one, that my buyer understands that, and that number two, that the seller doesn't always get it back, even if the buyer has defaulted. So sometimes, and we do keep money out there in that trust account for some time. And also, I always tell my buyers and my sellers that it is a non-interest bearing account so that they don't think we're making money on their money. So any questions at all on that? You guys are all experts. So we're good. 13 just says the contract constitutes the entire agreement and there are no representations, oral or written, which not have been incorporated herein. And I think that's really, really important that both parties understand that. You know, sometimes a buyer might say, well, when we were there and did a home inspection and the seller was there and he said that porcelain was going to stay. Well, if it's not written, he doesn't have to read it. Signatures, I think everybody knows this. Only manual or electronic signatures on contract documents are permissible for the purposes of this provision. Contract documents do not include voicemail, email messages, or text messages. I will say this, I think it's very important to keep all those emails, text messages that applies to your transaction because things do come up and you can go back and go, well, you said so. The date of acceptance is after it's been signed by all parties and delivered to the offering party. Well, you know, because we're doing .loop or DocuSign, that's pretty much an automatic. 13.7, FERPTA, I can hardly say it. Basically, that applies if my buyer is buying a house that is owned by a foreigner, and they don't have a green card, then there's a special tax. So, I mean, I suppose it could be a thing that if you list a house that's owned by what we would call a foreign person, you might ask them if they have a green card or, and if you want to know more about that, just look it up. So I've never had this to happen in my years of real estate. 14, professional advice and assistance. And again, you know, always explain to people, you know what, I'm not a lender, I'm not a surveyor, I'm not a tax man, whatever. You know, we just advise our buyer, our seller, that they seek the assistance of professionals. Ohio Fair Housing Law, we all know that. Residential property disclosure form. I always try to have that when I'm writing my purchase contract. And 14, Ohio sex offender registration and notification law. If anybody ever asks you, you just tell them to check with the county's auditor site and put in an address and they'll let you know. Like, for instance, like 2-3 years ago, I sold my daughter a house and I just checked it, you know, nobody there, but I was like looking out for her. But normally people ask me, I could just, you know, check I think it's under the sheriff's department. I forget, but I know you can look it up. Concessions, it just says buyer and seller authorize that we can report any concessions involved in this transaction to MLS. Closing and possession. So be sure you put in an exact date. Final verification of conditions, you know, you can put in 2 days, 3 days, whatever, to take your buyer back through the property. Possession, I always put a specific time, like November the 15th at 6 p.m., something like that. And then that way, buyers and sellers view the date differently, so put a time in there. 15.4, debris and personal property. That's always an interesting one. And honestly, when you take your buyers through there, you should see if the sellers have left anything. If they moved out, but if they're still there, you can't really do it. Duration of offer, again, put a time, October 27th, 12 noon, you know, or, you know, just be specific. And then because I check so many files, I love to see it when the buyer side is all filled in with the agent, the brokerage, the license numbers, the phone numbers, and the same for the sellers. I mean, I cannot tell you how often somebody has a problem, I check the file, and they have nothing about the seller's company. So just fill that in. It's really a big help. And also the lender and the title company, they need all that information. So just put those people in when you write up the contract. And of course, receipt of offer. And again, today in the day of like multiple offers, you just want to know that the seller received the offer. So that's kind of like a real quick review of it. I wanted to do this. I just feel that like right now in multiple offers, buyers and sellers don't really understand what the contract says, and they need to understand. There'll just be less problems. So does anybody have any questions or suggestions? I'm open. Here's the other thing, like Stacy, for you, for people that are newer in the business, please always call me if you have questions about anything. And I'm pretty good about either answering your phone or getting right back to you. So
I promise I'm not afraid to ask questions.
good. I like that, Stacy. Good. Just call me anytime.
Awesome.
You know so much about what you're doing right now. And then when you are a new agent, you do have a lot of questions. I certainly would.
Definitely.
I had, no, I didn't have anything else. So I think we kind of covered it all.
Hey,
And
Joan, I have a question.
Yeah.
Hey, it's Kathy. The request to remedy period after the inspection,
Uh-huh.
you had said the day for the request to remedy starts at the day at the end of the inspection, not the next day. Is that correct?
It says the day at the end of the inspection, I think. Let me
So I
go
want to
back.
make sure I'm counting correct.
You know, now you've asked me that, I have to look. What does it say? Where is that? Oh, am I almost there?
Yeah, you're almost there.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, the
Here we go.
buyer and seller shall have 5 days after the end of the specified inspection. So if that specified inspection ended today, October 26th, so October 27th would be the first day of the 5 days, yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to verify. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought it said that. I thought, oh my God, I better go back and make sure. I don't want to tell you something and then I was, no, I thought that.
Thank you, Joan.
And I think that people do get a little bit confused on that. And I know, I heard an agent say one day, no, everything starts, if it's October 26th, that's day one. No, it's the 27th, so yes. So Stephen, you have any questions?
No, very good. I think that it helps a lot. Obviously, I've got
Good.
Susan and yourself to lean on a little bit, so it's nice.
Yeah, I mean, like really just call me anytime and I quite often know the answer. If I don't, I'll find out quickly.
Perfect.
So Susan, how's all your puppies doing? I look at Susan on Facebook. Now you have 3.
Well, we have 3, yes. And I just watched the dog walker come in and let him out.
I love it. I don't have a dog right now. Saturday night, my grandkids, you all know because I brag them about, but I have 11-year-old triplet grandkids and they stayed all night with me Saturday night. And they have a dog, he's like maybe 6 months old. He's a Wheaten Terrier. He's just gorgeous and he's so smart. So he stayed with me too. And my daughter goes, Mom, I think he'll do anything just to have Gatsby over to your house. I love him. Oh my gosh. I'm never home enough to have a dog anymore, so I just can't do it. So anyway, well, thank you all for attending and call me anytime. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Joan. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye. Leave. Oh, what did I do? What? I thought I left. Well, that's weird. I can't get out of my meeting, Angela. Oh my gosh. Oh, now I am, I think.
All you have to do is click the button at the right, bottom right. It says
You know
end.
what? It's so weird because I saw leave meeting. I know.
That's because of how your computer's set up.
Don't want to keep them all hanging in there.
We got more. Leave.